Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Shutter Island in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Shutter Island. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office, collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Shutter Island is a 2010 American neo-noir psychological thriller film directed by Martin Scorsese. It was adapted by Leda Kalogridis from the 2003 novel of the same name by Dennis Lehane about a deputy U.S. Marshal who comes to Shutter Island to investigate a psychiatric facility after one of the patients goes missing. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo, with Ben Kingsley, Max von Sydow, and Michelle Williams in supporting roles. The film had its wide release on February 19, 2010, and received generally positive reviews from critics. It was chosen by the National Board of Review as one of the top 10 films of 2010 and grossed $295 million worldwide. The film is also noted for its soundtrack, which prominently used classical music such as that of Gustav Mahler, Christoph Penderecki, György Ligeti, John Cage, Ingram Marshall, and Max Richter. Plot: in 1954, U.S. Marshal Edward Teddy Daniels and his new partner Chuck Awley travel to Ashcliff Hospital for the criminally insane on the inhospitable Shutter Island, Boston Harbor, to investigate the disappearance of Rachel Solando, a patient of the hospital who had previously drowned her 3 children. The staff, led by psychiatrist Dr. John Cawley and his colleague Dr. Jeremiah Naring, appear uncooperative. The Marshals learn that Dr. Lester Sheehan, who was treating Solando, had left the island on vacation immediately after Solando disappeared. Teddy experiences migraine headaches, flashbacks of his experiences as a U.S. Army soldier during the liberation of Dachau, and also vivid dreams of his wife Dolores, who was killed in a fire set by arsonist Andrew Laeddis. Teddy explains to Chuck that he took the case to find Laeddis, believing he is on the island. Solando suddenly resurfaces and believes Teddy is her husband. Teddy later breaks into the restricted Ward C to find Laeddis, where he meets patient George Noyce, who appears to know Teddy. He tells Teddy that the doctors experiment on patients and some are taken to a lighthouse to be lobotomized. He warns Teddy that everyone is deceiving him and tells him not to trust Chuck. Teddy regroups with Chuck and they climb the cliffs toward the lighthouse but become separated. Believing he saw Chuck's body on the rocks below, Teddy climbs down but finds only a cave where a woman claiming to be the real Solando is hiding. She states that she is a former psychiatrist who discovered clandestine experiments to develop mind control but was forcibly committed. She says that Cawley and Dr. Naring will use Teddy's war trauma to feign a psychotic break, allowing them to have him also committed. Teddy returns to the hospital and is greeted by Cawley. When Teddy asks about Chuck's whereabouts, Cawley insists that Teddy does not have a partner and that he arrived on the island alone. Convinced Chuck was taken to the lighthouse, Teddy heads there but runs into Naring, who attempts to sedate him. Teddy overpowers him and breaks into the lighthouse, only to discover Cawley waiting for him. Teddy confronts Cawley and reveals his encounter with Solando, saying he believes Cawley is experimenting on him. Cawley denies that Solando ever existed and insists that Teddy has not been drugged, explaining the tremors as withdrawals from chlorpromazine, a neuroleptic medication that Teddy has been taking for 2 years. Chuck arrives and reveals he is, in fact, Dr. Sheehan. Cawley explains that Teddy is Andrew Laeddis, a U.S. Marshal incarcerated at Ashcliff for murdering his manic-depressive wife after she drowned their 3 children. Andrew did not seek treatment for Dolores when she burned down their apartment and instead moved his family to a lake house where Dolores carried out the killings. Cawley explains that Andrew's delusion is a result of his guilt, that his migraines and hallucinations are withdrawal symptoms, and that he had created the alternate persona of Edward Daniels, also a marshal, who acted violently and espoused conspiracy theories about the facility. The investigation is an elaborate role play to regain his true persona. Overwhelmed by his sudden recall, Andrew faints. Awakening later, Andrew calmly recounts the truth, satisfying the doctors that he is lucid. Cawley notes that they had achieved this state 9 months before, but that Andrew had quickly regressed. He warns that this will be Andrew's last chance, and if he lapses again, he will be lobotomized due to his very violent conduct towards other patients such as Noyce and towards the guards. Sometime later, Andrew relaxes on the hospital grounds with Sheehan. Appearing delusional, Andrew again refers to Sheehan as Chuck and says they must leave the island. Sheehan signals to Cawley, who orders that Andrew be lobotomized. Andrew then asks Sheehan if it would be worse to live as a monster or to die as a good man. A stunned Sheehan calls Andrew Teddy, but the latter does not respond and leaves peacefully with the orderlies for his operation. Cast Leonardo DiCaprio as Edward Teddy Daniels Andrewlatus, a former U.S. Marshal who investigates the Shutter Island Insane Asylum, Mark Ruffalo as Chuck Awley, Dr. Lester Sheehan, Teddy's primary psychiatrist doubling as his marshal partner. Ben Kingsley as Dr. John Cawley, a senior psychiatrist at Shutter Island. Max von Sydow as Dr. Naring, a colleague of Cawley. Michelle Williams as Dolores Chenal, Teddy's manic-depressive wife. Emily Mortimer and Patricia Clarkson as Rachel Solando. Mortimer portrays the version presented by Cawley as the one who escaped Shutter Island, later revealed to be a nurse in disguise. Clarkson portrays the version met by Teddy in a cave who affirms his conspiracies, later revealed to be a hallucination. Jackie Earle Haley as George Noyce, a patient in Ward C. Ted Levine as Warden. John Carroll Lynch as Deputy Warden McPherson. Joseph Sikora as Glenn Miga, Elias Koteas as Ladis, Robin Bartlett as Bridget Kearns, Christopher Denham as Peter Breen, Curtis Cook as Trey Washington. Production. Development. The rights to Dennis Lehane's novel Shutter Island were first optioned to Columbia Pictures in 2003. Columbia did not act on the option, and it lapsed back to Lehane, who sold it to Phoenix Pictures. Phoenix hired Leda Kalogridis, and together they developed the film for a year. Director Martin Scorsese and actor Leonardo DiCaprio were both attracted to the project. Production began on March 6, 2008, only about 6 weeks after Michelle Williams' former partner Heath Ledger unexpectedly died. Lehane's inspiration for the hospital and island setting was Long Island in Boston Harbor, which he had visited during the blizzard of 1978 as a child with his uncle and family. Music Shutter Island. Music from the motion picture was released on February 2, 2010 by Rhino Records. The film does not have an original score. Instead, Scorsese's longtime collaborator, Robbie Robertson, created an ensemble of previously recorded material to use in the film. According to a statement on Paramount's website, the collection of modern classical music on the soundtrack album was hand-selected by Robertson, who is proud of its scope and sound. This may be the most outrageous and beautiful soundtrack I've ever heard. A full track listing of the album is below. All the musical works are featured in the final film. Release. The film was originally scheduled to be released by Paramount Pictures in the United States and Canada on October 2, 2009. Paramount later announced it was going to push back the release date to February 19, 2010. Reports attribute the pushback to Paramount not having the financing in 2009 to spend the $50 to $60 million necessary to market a big awards pick like this, to DiCaprio's unavailability to promote the film internationally, and to Paramount's hope that the economy might rebound enough by February 2010 that a film geared toward adult audiences would be more viable financially. The film premiered at the 60th Berlin International Film Festival as part of the competition screening on February 13, 2010. Spanish distributor Manga Films distributed the film in Spain after winning a bidding war that reportedly reached the $6 million to $8 million range box office. Shutter Island was released alongside The Ghostwriter and with $41 million finished first at the box office and gave Scorsese his highest-grossing box office opening to date. The film remained at number one in its second weekend, with $22.2 million. Eventually, it grossed worldwide $905,697 and became Scorsese's second highest-grossing film worldwide. It is Scorsese's fifth movie to debut at the box office at number one, following Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, Cape Fear, and The Departed. Home media. Shutter Island was released on DVD and Blu-ray on June 8, 2010 in the U.S. and on August 2, 2010 in the U.K. The U.K. release featured two editions, a standard edition and a limited steel case edition. For the 10th anniversary of the film's release, Paramount Pictures released a 4K Steelbook and Blu-ray version on February 11, 2020. Expert, screw-turning narrative filmmaking put at the service of old dark madhouse claptrap, Shutter Island arguably occupies a similar place in Martin Scorsese's filmography as The Shining does in Stanley Kubrick's. In his first dramatic feature since The Departed, Scorsese applies his protean skill and unsurpassed knowledge of Hollywood genres to create a dark, intense thriller involving insanity, ghastly memories, mind alteration, and violence, all wrapped in a story about the search for a missing patient at an island asylum. A top-notch cast headed by Leonardo DiCaprio looks to lead this Paramount release, postponed from its original opening date last fall to February 19th, to muscular returns in all markets. As Kubrick did with Stephen King's novel, Scorsese uncustomarily ventures here into bestseller territory that obliges him to deliver certain expected ingredients for the mass audience and adhere to formula more than has been his nature over the years. Although The Departed and Cape Fear come close, Shutter Island is the film that most forces the director to walk the straight and narrow in terms of carefully and clearly telling a story. If testing himself within that discipline was his intention, this most devoted of cinema students among major American directors gets an A. He also chose his material well. Dennis Lehane's 2003 novel is quite a few notches above the norm for mass-market popular fiction. Ingeniously structured and populated with a rogues gallery of intriguing, deceptive characters, the book is a real page-turner, spiked with game-changing twists, which draws upon perfectly legitimate medical, legal, historical, and political issues. It even offers an ending sufficiently ambiguous enough to inspire genuine debate. At its heart, however, it's still a potboiler, smartly fashioned to yank the reader this way and that while providing a veneer of moral inquiry for respectability's sake. The script by Leda Kalogridis, an exec producer on Avatar said to have worked closely with James Cameron on developing the project, faithfully hews to the letter and spirit of Lehane's tome, leaving Scorsese and his top-drawer collaborators with the largely technical task of crafting a drum-tight suspenser that won't take on too much water via the many memory flashbacks and surprise developments. Working in a format that recalls the moody, low-budget horror mysteries of the 1940s produced at RKO by Val Lewton. Most pointedly, Isle of the Dead and The Seventh Victim, but in a far more visually vivid and explicit style, Scorsese employs an exquisite modern equivalent of old-fashioned process work to show U.S. Marshals Teddy Daniels, DiCaprio, and Chuck Ollie, Mark Ruffalo, chugging the 11 miles on a ferry between Boston and the eponymous island that's home to Ashcliffe Hospital. Warned by welcoming Deputy Warden, the excellent John Carroll Lynch, that the place houses only the most dangerous, damaged patients, the two men get an eyeful of weird zombie-like inmates doing menial work around an institution that resembles an impenetrable fortress, because it was built as one for use during the Civil War. It's a heavy, deeply ominous place, outfitted by production designer Dante Ferretti to instill not only menace, but also unease and anxiety. It's deliberately made difficult for Teddy and Chuck, as well as for the viewer, to understand the proximity of one place to another, to know where one stands literally and figuratively, to decide where it's safe and where it's not. Cloaking the mood is the pervasive disquiet of the Cold War tension of 1954. This makes it harder to get a handle on the task at hand, which is finding Rachel Solando, the murderer of her 3 children, who somehow escaped from her tiny room, got past guards, and presumably made her way out onto the island. The man in charge, Dr. Cauley Ben Kingsley, is elegant, erudite, and helpful, albeit only up to a point, and after interviewing staff and patients, Teddy and Chuck begin to feel they're on a fool's errand. But there are forces that keep the men on the rocky, densely forested island. Teddy, a grizzled World War II vet tormented by the fiery death of his wife, Michelle Williams in flashbacks, 2 years before, as well as by visions of the corpses he found at Dachau upon helping liberate the concentration camp, finds a cryptic note left by Rachel in her room that drives him forward. He may have hidden reasons of his own for sticking around. Then there's a gathering storm, which cuts off telephone and ferry service even before reaching full hurricane-level intensity. One can rest assured that Teddy is not alone in concealing secret motives and agendas. In fact, everyone has them, and beginning an hour in, they are parceled out in astutely measured doses to keep you hanging on to the very end. Along the way, there are encounters with a brilliant doctor with a suspicious German accent, Max von Sydow, a perilous descent into the bowels of the notorious Ward C, home to the worst of the worst, rising suspicions about what really goes on in this place, and accompanying doubt as to whether anyone who arrives on Shutter Island ever is allowed to leave. This is high-end popcorn fare, adorned with a glittering pedigree by a powerhouse cast and crew. DiCaprio appears deeply into his role. A lot is asked of him, physically and emotionally, and his battle and tragedy-scarred veteran embodies a tangible anguish. Ruffalo is ideally cast as the older but junior agent who takes a lighter approach to serious matters. If this story had been made in the heyday of noir, Kirk Douglas could have played Teddy, and Robert Mitchum would have been a perfect Chuck. Kingsley and von Sydow bring their smooth confidence to bear on their roles as institution big shots, while Jackie Earle Haley and Patricia Clarkson score in their individual big scenes. But the greatest interest lies in the craftsmanship, which is provided in spades by Ferretti, cinematographer Robert Richardson, visual effects and second unit overseer Rob Legato, costume designer Sandy Powell, editor Thelma Schoonmaker, and dozens of others. Even when it's clear Scorsese has decided to employ fakery and allow it to be obvious, it's done with elegance and beauty. Of at least equal interest is the soundtrack, supervised by Robbie Robertson, which employs mostly modern, serious, and classical music in the same manner of intelligent sampling that Scorsese normally uses rock and borrowed movie compositions. The sudden infusions of discordant, atonal, and otherwise unsettling passages by Ligeti, Penderecki, Cage, Adams, and more traditionally Mahler, among numerous others, further amplifies the sought-after climate of malignant ambiguity. Shutter Island starts working on us with the first musical notes under the Paramount logo's mountain, even before the film starts. They're ominous and doomy. So is the film. This is Martin Scorsese's evocation of the delicious, shuddering fear we feel when horror movies are about something and don't release all the tension with action scenes. In its own way, it's a haunted house movie, or make that a haunted castle or fortress. Shutter Island, we're told, is a remote and craggy island off Boston where a Civil War-era fort has been adapted as a prison for the criminally insane. We approach it by boat through lowering skies, and the feeling is something like the approach to King Kong's Island. Looming in gloom from the sea, it fills the visitor with dread. To this island travel U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner Chuck Awley, Mark Ruffalo. It's 1954, and they are assigned to investigate the disappearance of a child murderer, Emily Mortimer. There seems to be no way to leave the island alive. The disappearance of one prisoner might not require the presence of two marshals unfamiliar with the situation, but we never ask that question. Not after the ominous walls of the prison arise, not after the visitors are shown into the office of the prison medical director, Dr. Cawley, played by Ben Kingsley, with that forbidding charm he has mastered. It's clear that Teddy has no idea what he's getting himself into. Teddy, such an innocuous name in such a gothic setting. Scorsese, working from a novel by Dennis Lehane, seems to be telling a simple enough story here. The woman is missing, and Teddy and Chuck will look for her. But the cold gray walls clamp in on them, and the offices of Cawley and his colleagues, furnished for the Civil War commanding officers, seem borrowed from a tale by Edgar Allan Poe. Scorsese, the craftsman, chips away at reality piece by piece. Flashbacks suggest Teddy's traumas in the decades since World War II. That war, its prologue and aftermath, supplied the dark undercurrent of classic film noir. The term post-traumatic shock syndrome was not then in use, but its symptoms could be seen in men attempting to look confident in their facades of unstyled suits, subdued ties, heavy smoking, and fedoras pulled low against the rain. DiCaprio and Ruffalo both affect this look, but DiCaprio makes it seem more like a hopeful disguise. The film's primary effect is on the senses. Everything is brought together into a disturbing foreshadow of dreadful secrets. How did this woman escape from a locked cell in a locked ward in the old fort, its walls thick enough to withstand cannon fire? Why do Cawley and his sinister colleague Dr. Naring, Max von Sydow, ready to play chess with death, seem to be concealing something? Why is even such a pleasant person as the deputy warden not quite convincingly friendly? He's played by John Carroll Lynch, Marge's husband in Fargo, so you can sense how nice he should be. Why do the methods in the prison trigger flashbacks to Teddy's memories of helping to liberate a Nazi death camp? These kinds of questions are at the heart of film noir. The hero is always flawed. Scorsese showed his actors the great 1947 noir Out of the Past, whose very title is a noir theme. Characters never arrive at a story without baggage. They have unsettled issues, buried traumas. So, yes, perhaps Teddy isn't simply a clean-cut G-man, but why are the others so strange? Kingsley in particular exudes menace every time he smiles. There are thrilling visuals in Shutter Island. Another film Scorsese showed his cast was Hitchcock's Vertigo, and we sense echoes of its hero's fear of heights. There's the possibility that the escaped woman might be lurking in a cave on a cliff or hiding in a lighthouse. Both involve hazardous terrain to negotiate, above vertiginous falls to waves pounding on the rocks below. A possible hurricane is approaching, light leaks out of the sky, the wind sounds mournful. It is, as they say, a dark and stormy night. And that's what the movie is about. Atmosphere, ominous portents, the erosion of Teddy's confidence, and even his identity. It's all done with flawless directorial command. Scorsese has fear to evoke, and he does it with many notes. You may read reviews of Shutter Island complaining that the ending blindsides you. The uncertainty it causes prevents the film from feeling perfect on first viewing. I have a feeling it might improve on second. Some may believe it doesn't make sense, or that if it does, then the movie leading up to it doesn't. I asked myself, okay then, how should it end? What would be more satisfactory? Why can't I be one of those critics who informs the director what he should have done instead? Oh, I've had moments like that. Every moviegoer does, but not with Shutter Island. This movie is all of a piece, even the parts that don't appear to fit. There is a human tendency to note carefully what goes before and draw logical conclusions. But what if you can't nail down exactly what went before? What if there were things about Cawley and his peculiar staff that were hidden? What if the movie lacks a reliable narrator? What if its point of view isn't omniscient but fragmented? Where can it all lead? What does it mean? We ask, and Teddy asks too. He has also lost a personal and professional battle. Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio have made fantastic movies together like Gangs of Yep, New York, and The Departed, which are two of my favorites. They've made 3 movies, all of which were nominated for Oscars. My expectations for their 4th were high. Did it live up to those expectations? For the most part, Shutter Atlanta is about Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels DiCaprio and his partner, who are investigating the disappearance of an insane asylum patient. Later, it's revealed that Daniels took the case to find his wife's killer and to expose the asylum for doing illegal experiments. This movie was excellent for about the first hour and a half, but the last 45 minutes were flawed. It's psychologically thrilling, with small things like a woman picking up a glass to drink and the glass suddenly disappearing as she drinks, but reappearing when she puts it down. It also has some very good effects for Teddy's hallucinations of his dead wife, like when she is crumbling into ash in Teddy's arms. The acting is also very believable, especially DiCaprio, who has come a long way from being the pretty boy Romeo and a Romeo plus Ulita to the gritty, mentally unstable Daniels of this film. Now that we've been over the positives, this movie is by no means perfect. This may just be a result of being jaded from so many other horror movies and thrillers, but the majority of this movie is not scary. On top of this, some of the scares are ridiculous. There's one scene where Daddy is at the bottom of a cliff and hundreds of rats come out of a hill, which is unnerving, because the sound of all of the rats is outstandingly irritating, but isn't actually scary. I also got so caught up in trying to solve the mystery that instead of noticing things like DiCaprio's performance or the little things that make the movie just that much eerier, I was mainly looking for clues about what the big reveal could be. My biggest problem with this movie is the big reveal during the film's climax. I can't say exactly what happens, but I can say that it's a disappointment. The resolution of the movie makes up for this a little bit by giving the movie a sense of ambiguity, but it doesn't change the letdown of a reveal. Overall, this is a good movie. It just isn't Scorsese and DiCaprio's best. If you're looking for an entertaining thriller, then this is definitely worth seeing. Just don't expect it to be particularly scary, and try to ignore the climax as much as you can. You can see it in his eyes as U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels furies his way between Boston Harbor and the black cloud-shrouded Shutter Island on the horizon. It's easy to see that he has more weighing on him than a simple case of green around the gill seasickness. Screwy and disheveled, the man looks weary beyond his years. But as he and fellow Marshal Chuck all are ushered into the fortress like Ashcliff, hospital for the criminally insane, it seems that his personal baggage will have to be tossed in the back seat for the time being. This facility may be the most advanced of its kind in this modern age of 1954. But its damaged inhabitants are probably the most dangerous group of killers in the world. Teddy needs to stay sharp. The case at hand, a deranged patient who murdered her 3 children, has somehow disappeared from a locked and barred. The marshals have been called to solve this seemingly impossible mystery. But with every clue found, every question asked, and every shifty-eyed offuscation and false reply given, Teddy becomes convinced that there's more going on here than just a missing woman. Then a hurricane-force gale blows in, keeping the frustrated marshals locked down on this bleak and ominous rock for days, and the migraines and dreams began. Dreadful visions of war atrocities Teddy experienced years earlier, and disquieting visits from the beloved wife he recently lost. What's happening here? Is he going crazy himself, or are the jagged shards of some gruesome puzzle slowly coming together? Perhaps a more pressing question might be, once a good man peeks in on Shutter Island's secrets, will he ever be allowed to leave? Positive elements on the surface, a Shutter Atlanta appears to simply be a twisting psychological thriller. But by its conclusion, the movie takes some surprising turns that point to the sometimes fragile quality of the mind and spirit of Mina and the need to protect them through both actions and relationships. We are also shown mankind's need for good in the face of Teddy is a troubled soul who wants more than anything to be a good man. As his backstory slowly unfolds, we see that he's had a traumatic life. But we also see him make every effort to cling to what he knows in his heart to be good, even if that means his own demise. The beleaguered cop has sworn to find his wife's killer, not to avenge Hira. He points out that he's seen more than his share of killing, but simply to right the wrong. He goes into a potentially deadly situation to save his partner. He puts himself on the line, battling tremendous odds to reveal what he perceives to be an ugly government plot. The hospital's head psychiatrist, Dr. Colley, seems to be trying to do right by his patients. He states that Ashcliff is the most advanced and humane facility of its kind, dedicated to a mortal fusion between law and order and clinical care. Spiritual elements and unseen man is heard preaching the saving power of Jesus. A cell-bound patient whispers from the shadows, saying, "God help you." Another inmate displays a large tattoo picturing a thorn-crowned Jesus on his back. Teddy calls out to God in anguish, "Please, God, no." after trying to revive 3 drowned children. The question of whether Teddy believes in God comes up. A prison guard tells Teddy that he believes God loves violence because there's so much of it in the world. God gave us violence to wage in his honor. He says that Teddy rejects the idea. Sexual romantic content, a painting of a nude. Woman reveals her breasts. Several male patients display full frontal nudity while milling about in a shadowy cell. After stripping out of wet clothes, Teddy and Chuck are both shirtless and wrapped in towels. We see Teddy in the shower from the waist up. Crude conversations touch on the subjects of adultery, oral sex, and anatomical size. Violent content. Teddy has dreams and memory flashbacks throughout the film that are filled with incredibly gruesome imagery. One of the bloodiest is a war scene in which Teddy's unit liberates a concentration camp in Dau. Several times, we're shown close-up shots of a German officer who, in the process of trying to commit suicide, blew the side of his face off. He's choking in a pool of his own blood that spreads out on the floor around him. When the man tries to reach for a gun to finish the job, Teddy pushes the weapon away, and not to save him, but to make him suffer longer. Outside the officer's window are piles of corpses stacked like corded wood in the snow. The camera slowly pans across the frozen faces, including a mother and daughter and each other's embrace. Once, Teddy imagines the deceased looking at him and asking why he failed to save them. That same plea is duplicated by another dead girl in a later vision. The Americans gather all the German concentration camp soldiers together and, in a heated moment, kill them en masse in a bloody firing squad-style execution. Teddy pulls dead children out of a lake and lines up their bodies on the grass. The children's mother points to her handiwork and asks, "See, aren't they beautiful?" Teddy, deciding that it's his responsibility to release the woman from the grip of her insanity, shoots and kills her after she pleads with him to set me free. Later, a dream shows the same dead children with a different mother. This time, the woman is literally dripping with their blood as she interacts with Teddy. The children, too, are covered with blood as Teddy carefully picks one of Amma up. An Ashcliffe patient dabs blood from his own torn flesh and writes with it on the wall of his cell. Another patient grapples with Daddy, trying to choke him. The marshal responds in kind. He almost fights with the guard, knocking him out with a rifle. In his mind, Teddy shoots and kills Dr. Colley, leaving a huge blood stain on the wall. In reality, he blows up the doctor's car by igniting its gas tank. A hospital guard leans in close and asks Daddy, "If I were to sink my teeth right now into your eye, would you be able to stop me?" "Before I blinded you." Teddy thinks he sees the dead body of his partner on the rocks at the base of a high cliff. We see that the man Teddy identifies as his wife's killer has a raw, stapled, Frankenstein-like scar running across the middle of his face. Crude or profane language, about 20 fords and nearly 10 swords. Jesus and God's names are blasphemed over 25 times. God's is combined with DN at least 10 times. There are also a half-dozen uses of H, and several uses each of B, CH, and A. Vulgar references are made to male genitalia. One man spits out the N-word, drug alcohol content that he jams a needle full of sedatives into a doctor's arm. Dr. Colley gives Daddy what he thinks is aspirin for his violent headaches. It's suggested that he's baying slip drugs in his food, drink, and cigarettes. Chuck and a couple of the doctors drink alcohol. In a flashback scene, it's revealed that Teddy used to be an alcoholic. Nearly everyone in and around the Ashcliffe facility smokes either pipes, cigarettes, or cigars. Teddy and Chuck, in particular, are old-school chain smokers. Other note for the elements. Twice we see Teddy throw up. Conclusion. As I walked out of the press screening for A Shutter Island, I was greeted as usual by a studio representative with pad in hand and a "what did you think" on her lips. I hesitated. I hadn't yet had time to really even get my head around everything I just sat through. So there were only 2 words that surfaced. But even though I've since had ample opportunity to come up with more showy descriptors or pathy review statements, I think I'll stick with my original assessment of fiducia and a brilliant. The story itself, based on a novel by Dennis Lean, known for his blue-collar crime story. A Mystic Rivera is all pulp fiction thriller, but its execution here has a ball-juggling intelligence to it. Director Martin Scorsese, he uses long, lingering tracking shots, discordant sweeping musical passages, and heightened sound effects to echo classic Alfred Hitchcock at his drum-type thriller peak. In fact, if Hitchcock had made a picture about Norman Bates in a mental ward, I'm convinced it would have been at Ashcliffe. Audiences are kept constantly guessing at reality as the action slowly finals down to one simple and final question that makes all the pieces fit snugly into place. And though not truly spiritual in nature, that last moment makes a powerful and thought-provoking statement about a man's overwhelming thirst for goodness while chinned deep in all of the worst evils mankind can inflict upon itself. But there's the rub. Score says he's never been one to shy away from the grisly or raw, and he surely doesn't hear if these AA really been a classic thriller from the 1950s. The coarse language would have been softened, and the dark violence would have been dialed down, but we're half a century away from the 50s, and Martin Iota Alfred, so the worst of the worst is played out in shuddering openness in a Shutter Island. One scene in particular showcases what I'm referring to here. It is a conversation between Teddy and the warden at Shutter Island. I love that Ted Levine was cast as the warden, because it just adds to the spookiness to consider that the man who is supposed to be in control here is the same man who played Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Anyways, their conversation drifts to the violence that is inside all of us. Where I would differ from the warden's point of view is to say that God did not give us violence. God is love, and the Bible is clear on this point throughout its pages. Yes, there are times where God commands the use of violence, but violence is clearly something that arose from the fall in the beginnings of sin. Violence is an unfortunate fact of life. But I do not believe that it is a badge of honor that God seeks us to use to bring glory to Him. It is a symptom of sin in our fallen state. In fact, the Bible is clear that there will be no violence in heaven. Having said that, eye to eye is a symptom of our fallen state. That within the decade human condition resides the possibility of violence. So, the fact that I differ on a major point with the narrative that Scorsese builds here doesn't keep me from appreciating the fact that he has in fact built a profound narrative with a keen eye into the darker parts of our humanity. The movie contains many camera flourishes and technical examples of Scorsese's greatness. He is without a doubt one of the great masters of the craft of filmmaking. There are many homages and similarities to the work of the great Alfred Hitchcock in this film, especially the movie Vertigo. Knowing that Scorsese is a student of film history, it did not surprise me to learn that he had the cast watch Vertigo while they were working on this film. Shutter Island is suspenseful, thrilling, and contains a great plot twist, but to focus on those aspects misses the true greatness of this film. In my opinion, its greatness comes from a familiar place to fans of Scorsese's other great works. Though I wouldn't personally put this film up with the likes of Taxi Driver or Raging Bull, like those films, Shutter Island is interested in looking at and considering human nature, more specifically its darker elements. Violence is present here just as it is in real life. Where does that violence come from? And how do people who seem otherwise quite normal get to a point where they lash out in violent rage? There are animalistic tendencies inside every human. It is part of human nature. We see in the Bible how God offers help in renewing our minds and helping us in the fight against our animal flesh. The movie ends on its most famous quote. I can think of no better way for me to end this review. Shutter Island is a film that had me thinking long after I was done watching it. It is a film that is well made and well acted, and I definitely want to watch it again. All those are signs of a truly great film, and I think here we have yet another from Martin Scorsese that is deserving of that acclaimed note on content. There is a great deal of violence in the film, though there is not much violent action on screen, we see the aftermaths of many instances of violence. The bodies at Dio are shown multiple times, including one particularly disturbing scene that does show torture for women and children. A man is shown after committing suicide, and the bullet hole in his face is very gory. I could go on, but suffice it to say that the film has high levels of gore and violence, and that alone would make it unsuitable for younger audiences. There are some conversations about sex, and one scene shows a group of naked men huddled together, but there is not much sexual content in the film. The movie does contain profanity, and it is a thriller, so there are some frightening and intense scenes. Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, walks the dark, empty hallway of a mental institution. The tiny flame of his match goes off. He lights another one. A couple of minutes later, a man behind bars tells him, "Don't you get it? You're a rat in a maze. So is the viewer." Shutter Island is a psychological thriller, unlike any I have ever seen. It is also probably the most atmospheric thriller you will see all year. The year is 1954. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels and his partner Chuck Hall Mark Ruffalo arrive at Shutter Island after their ferry breaks through a mysterious mist. The island is an institution for the mentally or criminally insane. A1 patient has escaped, and their task is to investigate the matter. As Daddy digs deeper into his investigation, he loses control of it. Soon he is not sure of what or whom he is investigating. As the investigator becomes the investigated, one thing he does know is this: there is no escaping the island. The patient could not have escaped because he soon discovers he cannot escape as well. There is a secret behind this island. Both the viewer and the main character feel that from the start. I could not help but admire Scorsese's control over every element in this film. I saw similarities to The Brilliant Eyes Wide Shut. Yes, both are entirely different films, but with both the viewer takes a journey through the mind of the main character. We see what he sees, we feel what he feels, and we eventually reach the truth through his eyes. A psychological thriller, if there ever was one. Shutter Island will keep you guessing until the very end. At times, the flame will brighten the situation, and in a split second, you will be back in the dark, lost, confused, and desperate to figure out what it is about this Atlanta that feels so wrong. The film depends on a twist. It is not until after that twist that a masterpiece emerges. Shutter Island is a motion picture that demands repeated viewings. Prior to this movie, the only Scores film considered the film no more as his 1976 classic Taxi Driver. While Taxi Driver is a psychological neon noir, Shutter Island has a more traditional noir feel to it. We have our cigarette-smoking investigator, the complicated mystery, the low-key lighting, and the rainy weather. It is extremely difficult to discuss a film that relies so much on its ending without spoiling the whole film. For this is one of those films that generate conversations after the initial viewing. I know that I will be returning to the doomed island in the near future. And once I do, I will be judging with a more careful eye. I will take note of certain aspects that slipped my mind as a first-time viewer. It is the duty of a film critic to let you know what to expect without spoiling the film. Therefore, I will do my best in the coming sentences to let you know what it is that you are in for without revealing any spoilers. You will start out a tiny fish swimming in a pond. As the plot thickens, you evolve into the angler who keeps an eye on the confused fish. By the end of the film, the viewer becomes the person standing on the rock studying the angler who himself is studying the fish. In other words, you may get lost. You may not be aware of what is happening during the duration of the film, but as the film goes on, you get glimpses of the bigger picture, and eventually you reach it. What you make out of the truth of the matter will determine your opinion. I can only speak for myself. I was both dazzled and astonished by how Scorsese managed to keep me blindfolded for so long without having me lose interest. Shutter Island is nothing short of a cinematic masterpiece, a journey into a character's mind, a mystery within another mystery, an open door to a mastermind at work. Shutterton takes place off the coast of Massachusetts in 1954. I'm sorry, that should be of the coast of Massachusetts in 1954. Since every detail and incident in the movie, however minor, is subjected to frantic, almost demented, and not always unenjoyable amplification. The wail of strangled shells accompanies shots of the titular island, a sinister rain lashed out dropping that is home to a mental hospital for the criminally insane. The color scheme is lurid and the camera movements telegraph anxiety. Nothing is as it seems. Something terrible is afoot. Sadly, that something turns out to be the movie. Itself directed by Martin Scorsese and adapted by Lita Calligrid, is from a peculiar contraption of a thriller by Dennis Lean, like Shutter Island. In the opening scenes, the full dimensions of the catastrophe come into view only gradually. At first, everything is fine, or at least not quite right in a way that seems agreeably intriguing. Mr. Scorsese uses his considerable formal dexterity, his intimate, comprehensive understanding of how sound and image work together to create meanings and moods, to conjure a tingly atmosphere of uncertainty and dread. The vessel of those anxieties is Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays Teddy Daniels, a United States Marshal, taking a ferry ride out to the island to investigate the disappearance of a patient. Mr. DiCaprio, having grown perhaps overly fond of his accent from The Departed, brings it along for the ride, and it spreads through the movie like a contagious disease. Teddy's partner, Patna Chakal, played by Mark Mock. Ruffalo is supposed to be from the Pacific Northwest, but he seems to have left all his R's back in Seattle. Michelle Williams pops up in smudgy, color-drenched memories and hallucinations as Teddy's dead wife. Dolores, her intonations as thick and clammy as Chowher. Those dialect-coached Boston inflections predominate in Shutter Island, but are not the only voices heard on the grounds of the asylum where the patients perambulate like zombies and the orderlies lurk like vengeful specters. Ben Kingsley is Dr. Colley, the psychiatrist in charge, with silky upper-crust menace in his voice and a diabolical little beard on his chin. Max Van Sydow spouts fraudisms and insinuating Germanic tones that remind Teddy A, and of course not only Teddy A of Nazis, an association that helps to induce gratuitous flashbacks of corpses stacked outside death camp barracks. Those images emanate from Teddy's troubled mind, the status of which is one of the movie's chief mysteries. There are many others besides intimations of conspiracy, supernaturalism, Cold War shenanigans, and a whole lot more float around in the atmosphere, which is convulsed by operatically bad weather and the energetic furrowing of Mr. DiCaprio's brow as he interviews patients and staff members trying to figure out how a woman named Rachel Solando could have vanished barefoot from her cell. Daddy is plagued by headaches, bad dreams, and paranoia. Everyone he talks to seems to be harboring a secret. But what can it be? Is there some kind of espionage-related psychological experimentation going on? Is it connected in some way to grisly medical research undertaken during the Third Reich? Are Dr. Colley's methods, which he claims are a humane advance over the cruelty and superstition of the past, really a form of madness in their own right? And what about the strange coincidence that Shutter Island apparently houses the firebug who caused Dolores' death? All of these riddles send out tendrils of implication that end up strangling the movie, the plot of which does not so much thicken as clog and coagulate. Mr. Scorsese, ever resourceful, draws on the influence of Alfred Hitchcock, the master of carefully orchestrated psychological confusion, and also nods in the direction of Mario Bava, the Italian horror maestro, whose gothic fantasy assert the triumph of sensation over sense. Mr. Scorsese's camera sense effectively fills every scene with creepiness, but sustained gripping suspense seems beyond his grasp. And the movie's central dramatic problem, the unstable boundary between the reality of Shutter Island and Teddy's perception of it, becomes less interesting as the story lurches along. You begin to suspect almost immediately that a lot of narrative misdirection is at work here as MacGuffins and red herrings spawn and swarm. But just when the puzzle should accelerate, the picture slows down. pushing Port Eddie into a series of encounters with excellent actors. Emily Mortimer, Jackie Earle Haley, Patricia Clarkson, who provide painstaking exposition of matters that the audience already suspects are completely irrelevant. Mr. Scorsese, in effect, forces you to study the threads on the rug he is preparing with lugubrious deliberateness to pull out from under you. As the final revelations approach, the stakes diminish precipitously, and the sense that the whole movie has been a strained and pointless contrivance starts to take hold. There are, of course, those who will resist this conclusion, in part out of loyalty to Mr. Scorsese, a director to whom otherwise hard-headed critics are inclined to extend the benefit of the doubt. But in this case, the equivocation, the uncertainty seems to come from the filmmaker himself, who seems to have been unable to locate what it is in this movie he cares about beyond any particular local formal concern. He has in the past used characters whose grasp of reality was shaky A, or who stubbornly lived in realities of their own making A, as vehicles for psychological exploration and even social criticism. But both Daddy's Mind and the world of Shut or Island are closed, airless systems illuminated with flashes of virtuosity, but with no particular heat, conviction, or purpose. Shutter Island is rated R. Under 17 requires accompanying parent or adult guardian. Blood, swearing. Cigarettes directed by Martin Scorsese, written by Lita Calligrides, based on the novel by Dennis Lean, director of photography, Robert Richards, and edited by Thune Maker, production designer. Dante Ferretti, produced by Mr. Scorsese, Mike Medavoy, Arnold W. Messer, and Bradley J. Fisher, released by Paramount Pictures. Running time 2 hours, 18 minutes with Leonardo DiCaprio, Teddy Daniels, Mark Ruffalo, Chuck Hall, Ben Kingsley, Dr. Colley, Michelle Williams, Dolores, Emily Mortimer, Rachel Solando, Patricia Clarkson, Rachel Solando, Jackie Earle Haley, George Noyes, and Max Vancedo, Dr. Naring. For my first official review, I wanted to do a film that most people enjoy but often forget about until it's brought up and then you go, oh yeah, I love that film. Shutter Island perhaps most perfectly encapsulates that very feeling. Director Martin Scorsese has built a reputation over many decades of work as one of the most prestigious filmmakers in Hollywood. But this film is an oddity for him, not because of a drop-off in quality, but the content stands out dramatically when you compare it with his other work. His filmography has an abundance of gangster films, Robert Darrow and Joe Pesci. Shutter Island is not like any of those. Shutter Island is a mystery thriller with a nice splash of horror mixed in for good measure. The film stars Scorsese's new golden boy and Darrow's spiritual successor Leonardo DiCaprio as U.S. Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels alongside Mari follows Marshal Chuck Hall, both sporting some strong Bostononian accents and over-the-top precancerous cigarette addictions, both of which I am here for. The two marshals are brought to Shutter Island, which hosts a mental hospital for the criminally insane run by Ben, Kingsley's Dr. Colley, because one of the patients has escaped on the island. However, the marshals discover a greater conspiracy than they were brought there for. Shutter Island is an exceptionally tense experience from the very beginning when Marshal Daniels is vomiting from seasickness. At no point does the viewer have the opportunity to relax because it is clear that things are not what they seem. You are as on your guard as the marshals are. This is exacerbated by the brilliant technical aspects of the film. The score is haunting, ominous, and powerful. The use of lighting to convey the stress and physical pain was brilliant. There is one scene in particular where Marshal Daniels is suffering from a migraine, and the lighting used is so piercing that it almost hurts the viewer. But you'll be damned if you aren't craving relief from the intense pain, just the same as the Marshal. Furthermore, the lighting is of the utmost importance, as it is a great tell for how in the dark he is to what is really going on around him. Similarly, the sound editing process that the film underwent is more than just add intensity. It adds the mystery. There are key moments of the film where dialogue is not totally clear, but clear enough that the brain fills in the gaps to what we think they said, and the constructed dialogue makes Since only to be later revealed that we all missed one keyword that totally changed the meaning of what was said. It is a brilliant trick. Like with any great mystery film, this film relies on a twist ending that the viewer is not supposed to see coming. In some cases, an ending such as this can be considered a novelty that only really has an impact upon the first viewing. And while it is true you will never truly be able to recreate the sense of unknown in subsequent viewings, Shutter Island does offer reasons to watch it multiple times. If a mystery has been done correctly, subtle hints should have been sprinkled throughout the film prior to the reveal. Most of these hints had no significance to the viewer before they knew what it was they were hinting at. But it is only with subsequent viewings that we can all truly appreciate how intricately the seeds of mystery were woven into the story. It may come as no surprise that the acting in the film is exceptional. DiCaprio, who won a Best Actor Oscar in 2016, is one of the finest actors of any generation. So complimenting his work is fairly commonplace. What makes this performance stand out amongst his other work is just how much this film relied on him. In most films, there are scenes that do not involve the main character, often for exposition or to reveal something to viewers, but not Shutter Island. In the roughly 2 hours and 18 minutes runtime, he is on screen for virtually all of it. With the exception of a few landscape shots and opposing conversational camera angles, Leo never leaves the view of the camera. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but I challenge you to find any film that relies that heavily on the presence of its lead. The story focuses so intently on who Teddy Daniels is as a person, and it takes a special performance to portray paranoia, confidence, aggression, and intelligence. Alan won. Mark followed a great job as well, albeit his burden not quite the same as Leo. Ben Kingsley and Max Van Sydow both play their roles with exceptional tact, portraying doctors with both noble intentions and possibly sinister undertones. Their European accents certainly help in that department as well. The film is not flawless. However, in the latter part of the film, I couldn't help but be aware of the very obvious green screen use. Perhaps this is where the use of lighting actually hurts the film. The Caprio and Ruffalo are standing on some cliffs, and even to the untrained eye, you can see that the actors were most certainly not outside. I would give it a pass, possibly since the effects could have been convincing for the time, but this film is only 9 years old as the time of me writing this. CGI and green screen usage were not foreign concepts in 2010. Ultimately, it is not a huge deal and does not ruin the film, but it is a noticeable flaw. Also, there are a few parts of the story that upon careful review do not make logical sense. Specifically, why would the overseers allow for the events of the film to take place during a hurricane? It makes for a more dramatic and stressful story, but it seems unreasonable when you stop to think about it. But I know I am just nitpicking. Light, humanist, depressing, nihilistic worldview with discussions that God loves violence. God's gift is violence rebutted by God gives us order, with murder and mayhem denying appeals to God and psychiatry failing too. Plus strange politically correct anti-American revisionist history. References to the House on Un-American Activities Committee engaging in psychiatric experiments with analogies between Nazi Germany and the American government in the 1950s. But none of these political, psychological, spiritual musings seem to have any validity, and they turn out to be read. Herrings and socialism is extolled. 45 obscenities and 26 profanities, plus arguments about God saying God's gift is violence and God loves violence, countered with appeals to God and statements that God loves order constant references to violence and horrific aftermath of violence, including Nazi general who shot himself and is shown several times with his head partially blown off and he's still alive. Woman whose back is burnt badly. Woman shot in stomach with lots of blood. Children drowned. Man with highly disfigured face from beating. Doctor stabbed with, and protagonist beats up 2 people. No sex but hugging and kissing. Some shot of full male nudity and naked paintings of insane prisoners of the past and of naked women. Much drinking. And man is an alcoholic. Tons of smoking and man given drugs and deception, paranoia and psychobabble. Shutter Island is a psychological thriller starring Leonardo DiCaprio that proves, Pogo statement, we have met the enemy and he is us. Progressively inserted into this psychological thriller are passionate concerns about the Cold War, the state of psychiatric hospitals in the early 1950s, and about God and the nature of evil. Out of this may till the copyright lang, one can conclude everyone is a sinner, but it is doubtful that the filmmakers wanted that to be the conclusion. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels and his new partner Chuck Hall are summoned to an isolated fortress-like psychiatric facility on Shutter Island to investigate the disappearance of a multiple murderer, a woman from Oshacliff Hospital. As Daddy investigates, it appears as if this is a cruel and inhuman psychiatric hospital. He learns from a former inmate that the House on an American Activities Committee was using the hospital to test psychotropic drugs on socialists. Then he starts to realize they are giving laboratories to people. During his horrific investigations, especially of Ward C, where the most hardened criminals are, Teddy becomes aware that everybody is against him and that he has been trapped on Shutter Island. He wants to save people, but can never quite do it. He keeps having visions of his dead wife, whom he believes died in a house fire set by the landlord. He also has visions of his time in Nazi Germany, where he liberated Dau, the infamous concentration camp. He sees piles of Jews starved to death when mother and daughter open their eyes and say, "Save me." He stares at visions of the commandant who shot his jaw off in a botched suicide attempt. The woman murderer Teddy seeks evidently drowned her 3 children. So Teddy has visions of the daughter asking him to save her. As in any good psychological drama, nothing is as it seems. Teddy's investigation brings up questions of whether God loves violence or loves order. It brings up questions of whether psychiatry has any answers, and it throws in red herring discussions of socialism in 1950s America at the height of the Cold War. Shutter Island demonstrates some masterful filmmaking, but like many Scorsese movies, it has some significant flaws. The red herrings and blind alleys in the script do not help the story. The music and acting is over the top in a few places, suggesting the filmmakers thought this would add suspense, but instead they detracts from the movie. Finally, for those who understand plot structure, it becomes easy to see where the story is going by the second act. That said, Shutter Island is keep you on the edge of your seat. There are some real surprises, and Ben Kingsley does a terrific job as Doctor. Also, the movie setting and mood are extremely powerful. Whatever its virtues, the ending is such a downer that it is hard to believe that anyone would like this movie, except for critics who like to revel in bad news. Scorsese has said this is his ode to Hitchcock, but Hitchcock always had true heroism, even when everything seemed to be set against the hero. Shutter Island is the exact opposite. Furthermore, the intense discussions of whether God loves violence and the nature of socialism in a Cold War America will lead susceptible, uneducated people astray. For those who are discerning and informed, they will see that the sinfulness of man is the problem. And since the filmmakers fall into that category, they suffer from the same human condition. Marty and Leo, sitting in a tree KI-sighing. He puts him in every one of his goddamn flicks these days. If there were a way Scorsese could have figured out to get Leo on stage for that last strike, a light A Rolling Stones concert flick, probably playing Keith Richards or a better version of Ron Wood, he would have done. So unlucky for us that they didn't. It's a remarkable line of high-quality flicks that they've been pumping out together, which brings us to their latest collaboration. A Shutter Atlanta is a departure for both of them, since I can't think of the last time either of them apart or as a couple made a psychological thriller horror flick. But they've done it now, so let's see what the fuss, if any, is all about. Shutter. Atlanta is based on a novel by Dennis Lean, a writer whose other books always cite situated in Boston in different eras generally follow, like Scorsese usually does, a more down-to-earth true crime feel to the proceedings. This is a departure for all concerned, except some of the characters get to use that wholesome Sally, a Dorchester masshole accent. Lucky for them, unlucky for us. The other Lane stuff you might have heard of would be movies like A Mystic River, Gone Baby Gia, and his numerous other crime novels that haven't yet been made into movies. A Mystic River, in my humble opinion, was utter shite, but the world disagreed. A Gone Baby Gia was superb, though, and justified for me. The continued focus on the goings-on of the Dorchester scumhain is so obsessed with the setting changes to an island in the middle of Boston Harbor, and chronologically, it's set sometime just after we end the Korean War. A U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, is sent to an extremely high-security psychiatric facility to find a missing patient. The facility is for the criminally insane. And though they're happy to break out the electroshock therapy and the lobotomy needle at the drop of an inmate's underwear, the overseers of this facility seem to be trying to be more progressive in their approach to mental health these days, endeavoring to use techniques and therapies that are less invasive and inhuman and more gentle and cuddly. Teddy has a partner called Chuck Mark Ruffalo, and they both set about uncovering the mystery of Rachel Salando's disappearance, guilty of murdering her 3 children. We are told that she persists in believing that this never happened, and that her delusional insulation is so complete that she convinces herself the other inmates in attendance and guards are all her friends, acquaintances, and neighbors, and that she's back in her house anticipating her kids' return from school. Right from the start, we're clued into a number of oddnesses going on. It's a mystery as to what's going on, but anything set at a psych facility, especially for the murderously insane, is going to be both mysterious and horrifying. As Teddy uncovers more and more details about the case, he also reveals more about himself to his new work colleague and about his own deep-seated drama regarding his wife's recent death and his experiences liberating Du at the war's tail end. The Holocaust scenes, as they always are, except in The Life is Beautiful, where they provided the backdrop for a delightful romp, are harrowing, but the scene involving some U.S. Army soldiers' dealings with the Dow Guards is even nastier and is a brutal scene, not lessened by its surreal nature. Speaking of the surreal, seeing as this film is set at the psych facility and deals with some very mad people, much of the flick transpires as a fever dream itself. Teddy has particularly horrible nightmares, but his daily dealings with the staff, inmates, and guards of the hospital are just as unsettling. As his investigation goes on, a hurricane is off, tearing up the island at the same time, making it even harder to track down the missing patient. Thing is, though, anyone who's ever watched more than 3 films in their lives, at least one of them bang of The Wicker Man, knows that anytime someone invites you to an island to find a missing woman, girl, some seriously awful is going to go. I'm not ashamed to say that I think Leonardo DiCaprio is one of the greatest actors of his generation. Yes, I know it's a bold statement to praise one of the best-known and most successful actors around at the moment, who gets as much play in the media because of his supermodel girlfriends as he does from his solid work in so many flicks. It's just that because he's Leo, people just dismiss him, and rightly so. Playing Jack in a Titanica should have been a millstone and a latro around his neck that destroyed any chance of future happiness or success as an adult actor compared to others of that level of young fame. You'd think he'd be knocking off convenience stores for meth money or a guest starring on Celebrity Rehab before dying on a fuelent motel floor. Yet, he's still around. I don't know if the girls still find him pretty, but he does bring a certain intensity to his roles, which I think is what holds him in such good stead. I can't imagine him playing a sad sack bureaucrat at the Department of Administrative Affairs as an administrator administering the administration of administer. I can and did buy him as Howard Hussein of The Aviator, as a cowardly bourgeois suburban Schlubina Revolutionary Road, as an undercover Copina of The Departed, as a CIA agent in a body of lies, and whatever role he's played since 2000 after After the Beach, which still sucks as much now as it did then. He was even good as a racist mercenary in a Blood Diamond, a flick ludicrous on levels previously only theorized about by scientists until its actual release of the contemporary actors out there. He's one of the few that, for me, is the most reminiscent of the stars of Hollywood's golden age. And though he's worked for Scorsese for so long that people are starting to talk, it seems like his best work is still to come. He's great here, bringing a fearful focus to what is a very difficult part to play. It's difficult because he has to earn our sympathy despite the setting that wants us so much to not trust him or what's going on around him. Paranoia and terror soothes every cell in every poorly looked quarter of this horrible aging facility. And Teddy's stumbling progress through it brings us closer not to knowledge or a solution, but to the lengths Teddy is willing to go to in order to find out the truth being hidden from him by all the people who are trying to hide it. I would say the supreme virtue of his performance is that he remains a sympathetic yet tragic figure throughout. The enclosed world of the asylum is treacherous and ever-shifting, and the complexities of the plot are revealed to not be as complex as once implied. But the point is, the tragedy is what Teddy finds out about himself along the way is more devastating than any of the crimes occurring at the Ashcliffe facility. Flicks like He Is Shutter Island and A Session 9, and, to a substantially lesser extent, A One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and its Spice Girls version of Girl Interrupted, remind me of one unassailable fact. Facilities are inherently frightening to me. They don't need supernatural gore or kill crazy murderers running around lopping off people's heads to frighten me any more than just seeing these places depicted. Those walls, those atmospherics, give me the howling fan odds before anything else does. And of course, Scorsese, being a master filmmaker, takes full advantage of the environments to deliver and maintain a tense, harrowing, deeply paranoid atmosphere. Scorsese flicks for me are more to be admired than loved. I cannot and do not unreservedly praise any flick by Scorsese because the truth is, despite his title as America's greatest living director, I really don't like most of his flicks. I can see the virtue of many of them and can quote you dozens of lines from most of them, but there is some discomforting quality to his flicks that consistently puts me off. The quality, whatever it is that prevents me from liking a good Phyllis Casino or whatever else by Marty, isn't present here because I guess I felt more taken in by the story and by the way it was put together with superlative cinematography and editing and a, for me, terrifying musical score that really hammered home the horrifying elements of the story even before anything horrible occurred. The performances are uniformly excellent, with pretty much everyone putting in solid turns. Even Serb and Kingsley manages to put in a decent performance for once, suitably restrained, almost willingly, letting the other performances and story elements be a bigger than him so he can pull it all back down when required. There are fairly large aspects of the story of the mystery that will piss people off as being either unlikely or just flat-out ludicrous. I have to admit, having worked out the mystery pretty much in the first 15 minutes, the question becomes less a what happened / and more. So a why is it happening, and elements towards the end become less believable. But when you're working towards something as devastating as the end of this film, and considering the sensitivity and empathy the psychiatric staff are shown for once as trying to, it becomes less unbelievable. It also ends on an ambiguous note. Considering the harrowing troll through madness we've been experiencing for 2 hours, that is no less powerful for it. It's a pretty over-out and harrowing experience overall, but I enjoyed it well as much as you can enjoy these kinds of flicks. It's like saying you enjoyed receiving it during a car crash. Hard to believe, but not Martin Scorsese's new movie is a tale of sound and fury, signifying a broken bar. Well, not nothing exactly, but a heck of a lot less than it promises given the straining intensity of those performances, the glowering darkness of mood, the grand gesture at tech, 20th century history's grimmest nightmares, and the sheer length. This was supposed to be Scorsese's experiment in B-movie thrills, but no mere B-movie director would go on for 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's in running time we're talking about. And at the end of it, I got a whiff of Shaggy Dog. The silly twist ending is supremely exasperating, and creating the narrative foundation for this final revelatory whiplash has meant laying down some long scenes that at the time looked baffling and unconvincing. However, I admit, everything looks good and fits together. And the film packs a fair-sized punch. Shutter Island is based on the 2003 thriller from Dennis Lean, the author of Mystic River, filmed by Clint Eastwood, and Gone Baby Gone, filmed by Ben Affleck. The setting is the 1950s, an era when America's fighting man from the Second World War would often have found uniform jobs such as police officers in civilian life. Ones such as U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, in the scowling mode that he presented to the camera in Scorsese, The Departed, a man in almost constant spiritual pain as a cop. He is someone who has seen his share of horror in the line of duty and is now about to see an awful lot more. But this isn't at all why he appears so profoundly troubled. The clue here lies in Daniels' troubled personal life, his war record, and the death of his wife. We see him first on a ferry, wretched with a seasickness that is a part of his continuing personal malaise. He and his partner are traveling over the water to a scarily forbidding prison called a Shutter Island, a former Civil War fortress that has been converted into a maximum security facility for the criminally insane. And Teddy has reason to suspect that his wife's murderer is being kept here. Mark Ruffalo plays his partner Chuck Off, level-headed and much less affected by what he sees. On the island itself, both officers are disconcerted by sudden bad weather preventing them from leaving, and the fact that the prison chief smoothly amiable and pipe-smoking Dr. Collie Ben Kingsley seems to have been granted authority to do more or less as he wishes on his remote island kingdom. To the cop's disgust, Dr. Collie explains his liberal therapies for the psychiatric murderers in his care. He disapproves of brutal abattoirs and electric shocks, preferring a radical new approach of letting the patients cathartically work through and act out their anxieties. Teddy and Chuck are there to investigate the disappearance of a female prisoner patient from her cell, a stark impossibility given the security conditions unless the guards have helped her in return for sexual favors, or the prison authorities themselves for their own sinister reasons have made away with her. The fact that Dr. Colley's associate, Dr. N.A., till the currency cringe played by Max von Sydow, is German triggers traumatic memories that he was one of the U.S. soldiers who liberated Doc out to him. Shutter Island has distinct similarities, and little by little he suspects that the government has secretly enlisted certain qualified foreigners to help with psychological research here, using patients as guinea pigs. More even than this secluded Shutter Island may simply have evolved into the doctor's private sociopathic thief, a mad, dysfunctional sect where they do as they like and have no intention of letting suspicious police officers ever leave. Kingsley, DiCaprio, Van Sydow, and Ruffalo give the picture solidity and weight, and Scorsese provides Hitchcockian and Kubrickian perspectives on that weird secluded place which is closed in and yet agoraphobically exposed. It is perfectly possible to enjoy Shutter Island as a pulpy melodrama, yet I couldn't help thinking that an actual pulpy melodrama would be leaner in terms of plot. It would move more swiftly and be less self-conscious. There's just so much classy, brassy furniture in this movie in every respect: acting, direction, music, and production design. It is distractingly, disproportionately engorged with technique, all leading to a contrived ending. As for DiCaprio as Daddy, it is an angry, unsmiling, and rather opaque performance, the type of performance that Scorsese is now habitually getting from him in movies, including The Departed, The Aviator, and Gangs of New York, but he undoubtedly has presence and star wattage and carries the film. The awful secret of Shutter Island, which Daddy has in fact not yet begun to grasp, is finally hammered home by Scorsese with muscular determination, a cinematic sledgehammer for a pretty small nut. Most directors who got their start with Roger Corman kicked off their careers with some sort of a horror film. Francis. Coppa made Dementia 13, Peter Bogdanovich made Targets, Joe Dante made Piranha. A typically Martin Scorsese's apprentice exploitation work was a gangster picture box carba. Though Scorsese has often expressed admiration for movie fantasists from Eckel Powell through Mario Bava to Hammer films, he has made only 2 films with supernatural themes, both religious rather than horrific. The devil, of course, appears in The Last Temptation of the Christ. While benign reincarnation is central to Kundun, and yet few filmmakers have expressed the nightmares so well or so often as demonstrated by such descents into madness or urban hell. As Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, After Hours, and Bringing Out the Dead, Shutter Island from the novel by Dennis Lean is the nearest thing to a horror film Scorsese has made since Cape Fear. Its story of criminal investigation turns in on itself as the detective hero suffers from contradictory flashbacks. Say which one went to very nasty experiences during the liberation of a concentration camp and a bad marriage, which came to a gruesome end on the shore of what looks like Crystal Lake from the Friday the 13th films and drug-induced hallucinations. All this is footnoted by favorite moments from the School of Fright founded by producer Val Luton at RKO in the 1940s, a walk through a dark order of cages as insane arms clutch at the protagonist restages a classic shock scene from Mark Robson's Bedlam, which Scores once thought of remaking, while a disturbingly unsafe spiral staircase is a dead ringer for the one in Robert Wise's The Haunting. Though the U.S. Marshals played by Leonardo DiCaprio now is central to Scorsese's filmic universe as Dairo, or Kitla and Mara follow sport film noir hats and tough guy attitudes. They are forced to surrender their guns before they are allowed to enter an insane asylum, which is also a haunted castle. Lay passing out of a hard-boiled mystery into a full-on gothic melodrama, which includes a creepy turn from genre. Fixture Max von Sydow as the sort of shrink who reminds the hero of his bad experiences with Nazis. An Agatha Christie. Style Locked Room Mystery, a sinister lighthouse which doubtless harbors dreadful secrets, and a spectacular thunderstorm out of the old dark house or King Lear. Ben Kingsley plays the eccentric head of the asylum, a character type we've learned not to trust since Dr. Caligari, and brings some welcome sly humor to his barb chats with the hero, especially when he seems to be scheming to cover up unethical experiments or lamenting the damage done to his beloved car. Officially the best filmmaker in the world, Scorsese enjoys himself here in a way he hasn't since Cape Fear. There is depth to the story, but not quite enough to sustain all the Mysterio effects. Leah Haynes' novel has one of those tricky plots which keeps pulling the rug out from under hero, and the reader I would even count as a spoiler to give away which parts Patricia Clarkson, Emily Mortimer, and Jackie Earle Haley play, and several everything you assume is wrong moments are set up by some scrupulously fair clue dropping. The key to one puzzle is in the synopsis A, so start thinking. You'll need a pen and paper to work it all out. A possible problem with this is that on one level, the film you think you're watching for the first hour or so might be more satisfying than the one eventually delivered when all the gay answers are given. A low score adds a tiny final ambiguity that towards a little of the magic. In many reviews, I have castigated directors and writers, for that matter, of failing to make a successful thriller horror wire film because they went into it with one tone, a usually gray. There are precious few breaks in the bleakness of Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island, and yet I never felt bored by its unremittingly ominous tone. Maybe that's because Scorsese is a master storyteller and has the ability to produce subtle tonal changes even in a film that does not rely on subtlety in any normal sense. Of course, Shutter Island, based on a novel by Dennis Lean, Who's Gone, Baby Gone, was a recently adapted for film, opens with U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels. Leonardo DiCaprio losing his lunch on a ferry bound for the titular ride item day, and after introducing Teddy's new partner, Chuck Hallmarker follow moves to an exterior shot showing the ferry emerging from a fog bank like a ghost ship as a three-chord stinger blasts at us. This combination of sight and sound is abrupt and unsettling, and merely a taste of what is to come. It is 1954, and Teddy and Chuck are visiting a hospital for the criminally insane situated on a nearly impregnable island in Boston. Harbor ostensibly to investigate the disappearance of one of the patients, a woman who killed her 3 children. From the moment the film begins, we are made to feel that there is something that's off about the whole thing. Individual scenes feature intriguing exchanges and/or events, but is it possible that the omniscient eye-tie of the camera is lying to us? Is Shutter Island a descent into madness, an ascent from madness, or something altogether different? For a film as intricately staged as this to work, it has to have an incredible cast, seem to follow some kind of logic, real world, or a dream. Logic, but logic and play fair with the audience while still messing with it. Lita Calligrid's script twists and squirms like a shapeshifter trying to escape the grip of a god. But there are hidden within clues. Do they add up? Yes. And number is the head of hospital, Dr. Collie Ben Kingsley, beneficent or evil. Kingsley's ability to give a performance that could be interpreted either way, without seeming. Bonella adds gravity and a bit of humor to the film that is augmented niftily by Max van Sydow's Dr. Naring Naing, provokes a unique response in Teddy, causing him to flash back to the liberation of Doka at the end of World War II. Like any true noir, Shutter Island comes with more baggage than just seasickness. And what of Rachel Selinda, Emily Mortimer, the patient who has disappeared? How does anyone escape from a cell, locked from the outside, a walls several feet thick? Does this even matter? With Shutter Island, Martin Scorsese is playing on the same field as Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, and Jules Dassin. Like Bam, he tells his story the way it needs to be told. If it doesn't fall into place like a neatly boxed puzzle, it doesn't matter. It's the story he needed to tell, told the way it had to be told. We don't notice the loose ends because we can't be sure which ends exactly are loose. And like most great Mar films, it is the characters and all their flawed glory that carry us through. In this case, DiCaprio and Kingsley carry the film though the entire cast gets to shine at one point or another. Ted Levine's brief role as the warden, a philosopher of violence, John Carroll Lynch's darkly amiable deputy warden, a devastating Jackie Euro Haley. Shutter Island is a creepy and unsettling thriller. Scores builds tension to almost unbearable levels, but doesn't use violence to allow momentary release, but as another device to play on our nerves. To be blunt, the film exhausted me in a good way, though I had to think about it before I could pin down why this movie certainly lends itself to spoilers, as it contains multiple major plot twists. I had already been made aware of the ending before I saw the film for the first time. Personally, as I will discuss in this review, I'm glad for that. However, I know most people would not share that viewpoint. So, if you'd rather not have the ending spoiled, please watch the film before reading this review. If I had to choose a favorite director, I'm pretty sure I'd pick Martin Scorsese. There are so many fantastic directors, and on any given day I might give you another answer. Maybe the Coen brothers, Steven Spielberg, Ingmar Mara Bergman, Sidney Lumet, Francis Ford Coppola. See, I told you it's tough to pick, but I'm pretty sure that my answer on most days would be Martin Scorsese. Set aside for the moment his incredible mastery of the craft of filmmaking. Personally, I resonate most with the fact that many of his films, in fact, almost all of them, contain themes of spiritual or religious significance. I open my review of Shutter Island with that because I think this is a movie first and foremost about the downward spiral of human nature left to its own devices, absent renewal and healing. The human heart is an abyss of moral decay. Thankfully, most people are not absent renewal and healing. Some find it through therapy or other clinical means. Others find it through family and close friends. I am of the belief that while all those things do bring their own forms of renewal and healing, the deepest and only true way to heal the hurts we all carry is to accept and believe in the forgiveness of God and to enter into relationship with Him. But there are those people who have not experienced that healing in their own life. Those hurts they carry often lead to hurting other people. It is these people who have decayed into brutal violence against others that are found on Shutter Island. Shutter Island contains a federal mental institution for the criminally insane. It is there that U.S. Marshals Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Chuck Hall, Mark Ruffalo are headed as the movie begins. A patient named Rachel, who at various points in the film is played by both Emily Mortimer and Patricia Clarkson, has somehow escaped, and they have come to the island to investigate. As the movie continues, we learn about Teddy's tortured past. It includes a tragic fire that took the life of his wife, Dolores, Michelle Williams, as well as his service in World War II, where he was present for the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp. We delve further and further into his character until we're presented with an unexpected revelation. For me, the revelation was very much expected, not because the writing is poor. If you have no prior knowledge of the film, I don't think the reveal is easy to spot beforehand. I, however, had heard about the big plot twist before I saw the film, but I'm glad that it happened that way. Why? Because this movie is far more than a thriller with a big plot twist. I'd imagine that this is a film that greatly rewards repeat viewings. My first viewing was basically like seeing it a second time, since I was already aware of the reveal. Seeing it that way helps you appreciate the early writing more. And since you aren't focused on the plot twist as much when it happens, you can begin to consider the other plot points and where Scorsese is trying to take us. I think Scorsese is interested in staring the animal nature of man in the face. Look at the decay of human nature and consider it to see if we learn something. It makes me think of a phrase I heard many times growing up in a Christian environment there. But for the grace of God go I. God's role in all of this is where I personally differ from the perspective portrayed in this film. Again, my favorite aspect of Scorsese's filmography is that he so often infuses his stories with spiritual themes. Silence, for instance, I saw one of my favorite films of all time. Do I always agree with Scorsese's portrayals? No, but I think he should be rewarded for choosing to use his art to consider such important themes. Movies that score between 8 and 850 are great representations of their genre that everyone should see in theaters on opening night. Shutter Island explores psychology in a rewarding and terrifying manner, taking cues from horror movies to create an ominous atmosphere. However, the film's true success is its ability to make the horrors of mantle degradation all too real. And it's a great film because of Martin Scorsese's command of the visual language of cinema is unparalleled among any filmmaker working today, and possibly one of the greatest in the medium's history without resorting to cheap trickster scares. His camera makes the environs of Shutter Island into the essence of nightmares, where the only thing worse than what may be lingering in the dark is discovering the dreadful revelations still waiting to be found in the light. It is a film packed with misdirection and untruths, as told by the most arranged of unreliable narrators, that distorts itself even further with every subsequent viewing. Although the final twist in the tale is a neat one, Scorsese's ultimate grand giggle flourish is not on his protagonist, but the audience. For a story that deals with the human dependence on fantasy to rationalize the real and subsequently questions how much we can trust our perceptions of reality. Anyway, do better as lab rats than a group of people in a darkened room trying to make sense of contradictory information fed to them by a series of moving images. The clues in the title, Folks Do a Shudder, Atlanta is not just a film only Scorsese could make, but a story only a man who speaks cinema. So intimately could tell on my first viewing of Fashanta surprised and instilled in me even more respect for Martin Scorsese, maybe the best director alive. If not the hardest working dot, Atlanta marks only the second time Scorsese has ventured into thriller territory. First Day Cape Fear, and the first time Marty really tries to FK with us. The results are equally clever and entertaining. A Shudder Atlanta stands out for its artful and moody atmosphere, the product of a hurricane that batters the senses of two detectives who come to the titular island institution to investigate the disappearance of a murderess having no previous knowledge of this plot point. I found myself disconcerted by the noise and violence of the storm, which was likely the intended effect. I enjoyed the film in its entirety and was moved by the trauma Leonardo DiCaprio's Teddy Daniels experiences from his past, both in work and matrimony. One cannot review Atlanta without acknowledging the similarities between this and DiCaprio's other 2010 performance in Christopher Nolan's Inception. Similar to watching Viggo Mortensen in back-to-back Cronenbergs, the thrilling, twisty concepts of Scorsese and Nolan's films and the near-identical pasts of DiCaprio's characters force the two movies together in our minds, even if the directors each ultimately have something different to say about reality. A Shudder is not hurt at all by this comparison. In fact, it features the stronger performance from DiCaprio. I recommend watching this film twice, as I had to do it will be a completely different movie the second time around. I walked into Shutan with incredibly high expectations. Considering it's a Martin Scorsese film, I expected nothing short of a masterpiece, especially since it reunites him with current go-to guy Leonardo DiCaprio. Add to that the fact that this is another Dennis Lean adaptation, whose work was previously the basis of Mystic River and Gone, baby. Gone, and you've got the formula for a film that can't miss, right? Sure enough, Shutter Island is a good film. It's well acted, beautifully shot, and full of atmosphere. Some have said that this is Scorsese's The Shining, and yes, this film is full of references to Kubrick's classic, from the remote, chilling locations to the music. It's also strongly reminiscent of a series of Val Lewton thrillers from the 40s that Scorsese previously had issued on DVD, particularly the films Bedlam and Eye of the Dead. Still, I can't say that this is top-tier Scorsese for me. For some reason, I had trouble getting into Shutter Island. It just felt a little old hat, which is the last thing I did expect from Scorsese. The last time he dabbled in horror, he came out with the incredible Cape Fear remake, which stands as one of the few remakes that trumps the original in my book. Here, the film just never really takes off. I didn't find it scary, and at times my mind began to wander somewhat. That said, I really can't pinpoint what's wrong with it. DiCaprio is great, is one. Marshall Teddy Daniels. This is a fascinating, deeply layered character, with Daniels harboring many ulterior motives for his visit to Shutter Island, least of which is the investigation to which he's been assigned. He's haunted by the recent death of his wife Dolores, Michelle Williams, who he sees in nightmarish visions once he gets to the island. He's also dealing with the fact that he was present at the liberation of the Doc Death Comp in WBD2, which he's constantly reminded of in his nightmares. The Dot flashbacks are brilliantly filmed and truly disturbing. I think if Kubrick had lived to direct his planned Holocaust film, The Aryan Papers, it would have been similar to the way Scorsese shoots the sequences. And I still hope he finds time to make a WW2 film at some point, as his partner Ruffalo is quite good, although the character initially comes off as a tad bland until we find out more about his own reasons for being on Shadow Island. Playing the psychiatrists in charge of Ashik, we get two old bros, Max Van Sydow and Ben Kingsley. Sydow's the more enigmatic, sinister-seeming doctor, and the former exorcist is great. Kingsley is terrific as the more compassionate doctor, and it's nice to finally see him in a film worthy of his talents, as he's been in way too much crap lately. Visually, Shutter Island is a feast with Scorsese once again teaming up with Robert Richardson, and the look of the film is reminiscent of their work on The Aviator. The film has the look of being shot with old two-strip Technicolor, which is appropriate considering the period setting. I also love the music score, which is all source material from artists like Briano, John Cage, and Ingram Marshall. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise, though, as when has the music in a Scorsese film been anything less than exquisite? It helps that once again he's working with his old pal Robbie Robertson as music supervisor. My problems with Shudder or Ron and mostly deal with the last third of the film, which feels somewhat anticlimactic considering the buildup we've been getting. I was also somewhat underwhelmed by the Mind FK ending, which is predictable in its unpredictability, if that makes any sense. However, the final scene is indeed haunting. In the end, Shutter Island is a film that I think I need some time to absorb. While it's certainly not among his best, it's still a Scorsese film, so you get the level of quality here that you won't get elsewhere. I also have the feeling that this is the type of film that might benefit from repeat viewings, so I'll be anxious to give this another look. Somewhere down the line. Sure, it's not a masterpiece, but it's Scorsese and it demands to be seen. Shutter Island is a film that usually gets tossed aside when discussing the greater movies of filmmaker Martin Scorsese. But since first seeing it in the theater during its original 2010 release 3 times, actually, I've stood firmly by my assertion that it's absolutely top-tier scores. I loved everything about it then, and I found that it still holds up to repeat viewings. The cast, the script, the costumes, the production design, and of course the direction are all top-notch. Adapted from the novel by Dennis Lean, Shutter Island at the time marked the 4th collaboration between director Martin Scorsese and Oscar winner Leonardo DiCaprio. They would retake in 2013's The Wolf of Wall Street and their latest Killers of the Flower. Moon is due out next year. Here Scorsese delves into the psychological thriller genre while also brilliantly injecting elements of horror and even classic noir. It all fits great with the cool period setting and the overall captivating premise. DiCaprio plays Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels, who is summoned to Ashcliff Hospital on Shatter Island in Boston Harbor. It's a mental hospital for the criminally insane where a patient has recently gone missing. Teddy is accompanied by his new partner, Chuck Mark Ruffalo, to investigate the disappearance, but they're immediately met with a lack of cooperation. Teddy grows increasingly impatient, particularly with the facility's head psychiatrist, Dr. Colley, Ben Kingsley. To complicate matters, Teddy is being haunted by recurring dreams of his wife, Michelle Williams, who we learned died 2 years earlier. Scorsese is meticulous and deliberate in unfolding the many layers of the story written by Lita Kalogridis, often focusing on misdirection more than a straightforward narrative. He sends us in several different directions, but never gives us any firm footing until the end. And as usual for Scorsese, he never does anything without a purpose or reason. Whether it's metaphorical revelatory or a simple hodge, his scenes are filmed with specificity and intent. If you fail to soak in the details, there's a good chance you may miss much of what he's going for. In a movie like this, the less you say about the story, the better. But as the mystery uncoils, Scorsese reveals as much through his camera as through the script. The riveting cinematography from Quentin Tarantino, regular Robert Richardson, helps make The Island one of the most effective supporting characters. Pedex Island in Boston Harbor was used for the haunting. Panoramic shots of Shutter Island, and was particularly effective in setting the tone in the chilling opening sequence. From there, the camera steadily works to immerse us deeper and deeper into the story's dark and unsettling setting. As for the performances, DiCaprio delivers what is one of my favorite performances of his to date. He's handed some challenging and emotionally heavy material, and he nails it. Ruffalo Williams and Kingsley, along with Emily Mortimer, Patricia Clarkson, Jackie Earle Haley, and John Carroll Lynch, make for a stellar supporting cast. We even get the late great Max van Sydow's small yet terrific role playing a creepy German doctor with a mysterious presence. Scorsese is known for surrounding himself with quality performers, and it's certainly no different here. Shutter Island was one of the best films of 2010, and it remains among my favorites from Martin. Scorsese, it's impossible to restrict it to any one genre. It maintains a wonderfully eerie tone, and the direction and visual energy is sublime. Scorsese takes us on an emotional ride that can be hard to watch, and especially as truths are slowly unearthed. The movie does require patience, but the payoff both narratively and cinematically makes every second of this extraordinary film worthwhile. Shutter Island starts working on us with the first musical notes under the Paramount logo's mountain even before the film starts. They're ominous and doomy. So is the film. This is Martin Scorsese's evocation of the delicious, shuddering fear we feel when horror movies are about something, and don't release all the tension with action scenes. In its own way, it's a haunted house movie, or make that a haunted castle or fortress. Shatter Island, we're told, is a remote and craggy island off Boston where a Civil War-era fort has been adapted as a prison for the criminally insane. We approach it by boat through lowering skies, and the feeling is something like the approach to King Kong's island looming in gloom from the sea. It fills the visitor with dread. To this island traveled U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner Chuck, Mark Ruffalo. It's 1954, and they are assigned to investigate the disappearance of a child murderer, Emily Mortimer. There seems to be no way to leave the island alive. The disappearance of one prisoner might not require the presence of two marshals unfamiliar with the situation. But we never ask that question, not after the ominous walls of the prison arise, not after the visitors are shown into the office of the prison medical director, Dr. Colley, played by a Ben Kingsley, with that forbidding charm he has mastered. It's clear that Teddy has no idea what he's getting himself into. Steady is such an innocuous name in such a gothic setting. Scorsese, working from a novel by Adonis Lean, seems to be telling a simple enough story here. The woman is missing, and Teddy and Chuck will look for her. But the cold gray walls clamp in on them, and the offices of Colley and his colleagues, furnished for the Civil War commanding officers, seem bored from a tale by Edgar Allan Moore. Scores the craftsman chips away at reality piece by piece. Flashbacks suggest Teddy's traumas in the decades since World War II. That war, its prologue and aftermath, supplied the dark undercurrent of classic film war. The term post-traumatic shock syndrome was not then in use, but its symptoms could be seen in men attempting to look confident in their facades of unstyled suits, subdued ties, heavy smoking, and fedoras pulled blow against the rain. DiCaprio and Ruffalo both affect this look, but DiCaprio makes it seem more like a hopeful disguise. The film's primary effect is on the senses. Everything is brought together into a disturbing foreshadow of dreadful secrets. How did this woman escape from a locked cell in a locked ward in the old fort, its walls thick enough to withstand cannon fire? Why do Colley and his sinister colleague, Dr. Naring Max van Sydow, ready to play chess with death, seem to be concealing something? Why is it? Even such a pleasant person as the deputy warden, not quite convincingly friendly, he's played by a John Carroll Lynch, Marge's husband in Fargo, so you can sense how nice he should have been. Why do the methods in the prison trigger flashbacks to Teddy's memories of helping to liberate a Nazi death camp? These kinds of questions are at the heart of film war. The hero is always flawed. Scorsese showed his actors the great 1947 out of the past, whose very title is a war theme. Characters never arrive at a story without baggage. They have unsettled issues, buried dramas, so yes, perhaps Daddy isn't simply a clean-cut G-man, but why are the others so strange? Kingsley in particular exudes menace every time he smiles. There are thrilling visuals in Shutter Island. Another film score showed his cast was Hitchcock's Vertigo, and we sense echoes of its hero's fear of heights. There's the possibility that the escaped woman might be lurking in a cave on a cliff or hiding in a lighthouse. Both involve hazardous terrain to negotiate, above vertiginous falls to waves pounding on the rocks below. A possible hurricane is approaching. Light leaks out of the sky. The wind sounds mournful. It is, as they say, a dark and stormy night. And that's what the movie is about. Atmosphere, ominous portents, the erosion of Daddy's confidence, and even his identity. It's all done with flawless directorial command. Scores he has fear to evoke, and he does it with many notes. You may read reviews of Shutter Island and complaining that the ending blindsides. The uncertainty it causes prevents the film from feeling perfect on first viewing. I have a feeling it might improve on second. Some may believe it doesn't make sense or that. If it does, then the movie leading up to it isn't. I asked myself, okay, then how should I attend? What would be more satisfactory? Why can't I be one of those critics who informs the director what he should have done instead? Oh, I've had moments like that. Every movie goes, but not with Shutter Island. This movie is all of a piece, even the parts that don't appear to fit. There is a human tendency to note carefully what goes before and draw logical conclusions. But what if you can't nail down exactly what went before? What if there were things about Key and his peculiar staff that were hidden? What if the movie lacks a reliable narrator? What if its point of view isn't omniscient but fragmented? Where can it all lead? What does it mean? We ask, and Teddy asks too. A. Shutter Island is an elaborate puzzle which came out in the same year as Christopher Nolan's, not the similarly themed Day Inception, both presenting us with different layers of reality and inviting us to dig deeper into the human psyche and to conflicting, not always compatible power games that are in operation and where no one can be trusted. We have an unreliable narrator, and the lines between fantasy and reality are blurred, making this a curious interior investigative drama. It is a good film, but arguably by Scorsese standards, more of a B movie, and one which, like a Cape Fear 2 decades earlier, was made for a more popular audience, and which in turn enabled Scorsese to make his more personal, less blockbuster-oriented passion projects. The over 2-hour running time bloats what is really a shaggy dog story and is set on an island off Boston Harbor that is being used as a psychiatric institute for seriously unwell, violent, and delusional patients. Leonardo DiCaprio plays a U.S. Marshal who enters the facility to ask questions about one of the patients. But as the film unfolds, it turns out that he may really be one of the patients himself, who has created the role of a police investigator as a person to help him cope with the death by drowning of his children at the hands of his wife, who appears here as an apparition played by Michelle Williams, and whom he in turn murdered. DiCaprio believes his wife's killer is being housed in the institution, and perhaps it is not surprising that it turns out the person he is investigating is himself. This is a technically superior and sumptuously mounted film with obvious Hitchcockian and leanings, but it is Scorsese going through the motions in a film that frankly feels beneath him. Everything about a Shutter Island is overbearing, and it is good, exciting Hulkum, but the stylization, production design, lavish dream sequences, and thunderscore are over the top and serve to accentuate the hollowness that lies beneath. This is a gothic melodrama where the rug is pulled out from underneath the viewer. And in lesser hands, this would be a treat to behold, but for someone of Scorsese's caliber, it lacks the emotional heft that we have come to expect, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.